We had, we are recording the meeting, as you may have just heard. So I guess we can go ahead and get formally started. Thank you everybody for being here. Great turnout. Really excited to see you all again and give you an update in the first of three spotlight session updates here in the fall. We had the calendar invite for this meeting has the Zoom link, and I'm glad all of you found it. A couple of folks may have noticed if you have Outlook, because of the way our Outlook system works, it automatically included a Teams link too. So Annalise has posted over in Teams, redirecting folks who may have clicked the wrong one, but it looks like everyone's here. So thanks for making it. And Roshini, if you're running the slides, if you could advance it a couple to this. Okay, so obviously we're all familiar with Zoom. If you're not speaking or asking a question, we ask that you mute your mic. Feel free to leave your camera on. And if you'd like to ask a question, this is a pretty informal meeting. We've done this a few times. Feel free to just break in. But if you also like to use the raise hand feature, you can do that over in the chat. Next, and Annalise Gill, if you have any technical difficulties, is available. She's the one who sent the calendar invite, so you can send her an email if you didn't catch her phone number there. So our agenda for today, we'll do a brief welcome, which I'm doing right now, and then Roshini is going to run us through the RUC innovation task of the current forward drive research, including the objectives, a comparison of business models, which we have been exploring as new ways of doing RUC, and then we decided we should look at integrating these business models because it might be confusing for customers if we don't. And then finally, Jingjing Fernandez, who's leading the next phase of work under this federal grant, is going to present potential pilot scenarios, which we will be presenting again at the December steering committee meeting for final adoption, and that will determine the activities we do in the field next year. So if we could advance to the next slide. Again, welcome. I don't know if we need to go around the room and do quick introductions. Invite folks to say hello. Obviously, I'm Travis Dunn, project manager from CDM Smith, and I'm going to call names as I see them in the list and invite folks to come on the mic and say hello. So start with Roshini.
Hello, Roshini Duran. I am a consultant with CDM Smith, and I'm the lead on research and innovation, and you'll hear from me a lot today.
Senator Fortunato.
Hi, Senator Fortunato, 31st Legislative District, which is South Auburn, Sumner, goes all the way out to Mount Rainier. If you go to Crystal Mountain and Sunrise, you're in my district.
Great, thanks for being here. Sharon.
Sharon Nelson, veteran of this advisory committee, and trying to represent the general consumer interest.
Thank you. Allegra.
Allegra Calder at Burke Consulting.
Tom.
Tom Hingston from Everett Transit, representing the Washington State Transit Association.
Thanks, Tom. Aaron.
Aaron Halbert with the Washington State Transportation Commission, and I'm a financial analyst with them.
Representative Cliburn.
Former Representative Cliburn from the 41st District, and glad to be a part and still part of this conversation.
Baxter.
Hi, I'm Baxter Shandenbill. I'm a new consultant at CDM Smith, and I'll be helping on the research and innovation task.
Brian. Brian Ziegler, that is.
Thank you for clarifying. Thanks, Travis. And I'm so glad we're doing introductions because I wanted to find out who Fifth Church was. But they seem to have left.
Yeah, no, it was me, Matthew. Sorry, I work for CDM. I had been on a church call earlier and just did not somehow change my Zoom login. Apologies.
Thank you for clarifying that, Matt. Brian Ziegler with the Freight Board. Good morning.
Matthew, you were next to my list.
Okay, Matthew Dorfman with CDM Smith, just supporting this project as needed.
Chloe.
Chloe Kinsey with Burke Consulting.
Brian Moore.
Brian Moore, nonpartisan staff with the Senate Transportation Committee.
And Kurt Augustine.
Hello, all. I'm Kurt Augustine. I'm the Senior Director for Government Affairs for the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, which is a trade association for every automaker except one who sells vehicles in the United States, as well as many of the technology companies that provide the technology for vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and zero emission vehicles. And great to be part of this for, I think, at least 11 years now.
Thanks, Kurt, for your extended service. Dana.
Dana Quam, staff to the House Republican Caucus.
Doug.
Good morning, Doug Vaughn, Washington State DOT.
Jing.
Jing Fernandez with CDM Smith.
We'll be hearing more from Jing later today. Hannah.
Morning, Hannah McCarty with the Senate Democratic Caucus staff.
Jan.
Good morning. I'm a member of the steering committee representing the motoring public.
Jennifer.
Hopefully I'm the only Jennifer. Jennifer Harris, staff to the House Transportation Committee.
Linda, I believe maybe Linda Kennedy.
Muted. Good morning. I'm Linda Kennedy, working with Yates Consulting and conducting focus groups.
Thanks, Linda, for being here. Mark.
If that's me, this is Mark Madison. I'm staff to the House Transportation Committee.
Great. Rima.
Good morning, Rima Griffith, Transportation Commission.
Representative Orcutt.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ed Orcutt, State Representative from the 20th District, South Thurston, most of Lewis, East Cowlitz, and a little bit of unincorporated North Clark. I've been a member of the work group since 2013 when I was the ranking member on transportation. Somehow when ranking member got changed, this didn't go along with it, and I'm still here.
Representative Ramos.
Thank you. Rep. Bill Ramos from the 5th Legislative District, which is a very eastern part, more rural part of King County, and also one of the vice chairs on the House Transportation Committee.
Sadiq.
Sadiq Simmons, Data Analytics Manager for Department of Licensing. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Sadiq. And Mike Villeneuve.
Good morning, Mike Villeneuve. I'm with the Washington Division of Federal Highways.
Terrific. The names were bouncing around an awful lot. Is there anybody who I missed who would like to introduce themselves before we move into the presentation? A minor miracle. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Great turnout again. Happy you're all here. I just want to give a quick preview for those of you who aren't able to stay till the end of today's presentation of where we are and what's happening next. So we have 3 major research tasks underway right now that will be mostly wrapping up by the end of this calendar year. We'll hear about the first one today on RUC Innovation. On November 3rd at 9 a.m., we have a spotlight session on cost of collection, same format as this call right here. And we will be talking about the recent series of workshops we conducted with the Department of Licensing and the Oregon and Utah Departments of Transportation on 3 topics aimed at figuring out whether there are opportunities for reducing costs of collecting RUC through innovation and through multi-state collaboration. Then on November 23rd at same time, same format, 9 a.m., we'll have the spotlight session on the equity research, which includes a recap of all the outreach that's been going on over the course of this year through focus groups and interviews and interactions with community groups all around the state, as well as an update to the financial analysis that was conducted and presented at the last spotlight session. Then in December on the 13th, we'll have a full steering committee meeting. It'll be a half day, or the middle half of the day, that is, 10 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. is the current schedule. And at that meeting, we're going to recap all 4 research tasks, the 3 that are the subject of the spotlight sessions, as well as an update to the RUC financial model, which is a separate task we haven't done a spotlight on yet. And importantly, at that steering committee meeting, we will be presenting the pilot test concepts that we are proposing for next calendar year to take to the field. And you'll hear about a few of those today in Roshini and Jingjing's presentation, and you'll hear about a few more on November 3rd in the cost of collection presentation, and you'll hear about a few more still on November 23rd during the equity spotlight. So we've collected quite a few concepts that we think are worthy of further testing, and want to select the most worthy ones that help advance the subject matter and understanding of it with your input both today and throughout the course of these spotlights, and then culminating at that December 13th steering committee meeting. So before I turn it to Roshini, I see Senator Saldana has just joined, so I'd like to invite her to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Rebecca Saldana, State Senator of the 37th and Vice Chair of our Transportation Committee, and have been a legislative representative on this task force. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I see one additional name, Connor.
Yeah, good morning, Connor Lindsay, Legislative Assistant to Senator Steve Hobbs. I'll be listening in this morning. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for being here. Okay, well, with that, Roshini, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll get started with an intro. I know this is a dense and rather technical topic, so I'll start off with a refresher and then talk about the task and its objectives. So last time, we mentioned that this task was originally called Mileage Reporting Enhancements, but now we refer to it more broadly as RUC Innovation. And I'm going to run over the objectives that we refined over the course of our research. So, the objective is not to do a rerun of the first pilot, but to seek improvements in various areas. So it identified the 3 following objectives: improve the user experience, optimize RUC service, and open the market. So these are refined objectives. Starting with the first one, user experience, our focus is to figure out how to give more relevant choices for mileage reporting and payment in particular. Then how to think about RUC more holistically, meaning how to think of RUC in terms of an overall service instead of system components, how to find ways to come up with simple, convenient, and accessible processes to address systems and operational equity and encourage natural compliance. And then finally, how do we come up with user-friendly policies so that end users understand what they are signing up for and what data they are sharing and what rights they have. So moving on to the second objective, optimizing RUC service. So here we're looking at it from more from an administrative perspective. The question is how to optimize RUC service. And here we address cost efficiency, simplicity of administration for the state. We are considering that state administrators are also internal users and their experience matters also. So we will research states' capabilities, try to understand where the gaps that have to be filled when it comes to supporting a RUC service is or are, and then identify where the private sector can augment or enhance the state's capabilities. And then it's also about identifying which roles the public and private entities can play according to what they are best positioned to do to support the most efficient RUC service. Finally, open the market. So by expanding our research, we're discovering new players that could support RUC. These players have different capabilities. What we are trying to do, well, they have different capabilities and also different business models or revenue models. So we're using the term, a pretty generic term, business model to designate those new players and show that not only do they have the capabilities to support RUC, but they should be thinking about whether there's a business case for them to support RUC, because providing RUC services, for example, can add a revenue line to their businesses. And then This research is also an opportunity to define standards. So as we're having conversations with players, we're seeing that they have capabilities, but there are different ways of doing things. So as we invite them, we realize we just can't give them a sandbox and ask them to come up with their own set of rules to support RUC independently. It falls on government agencies often to define some overarching standards, decide when to be prescriptive when it comes to collecting revenue, and what to leave up to vendors to promote innovation so that they can find ways to reduce cost of collection and offer, sometimes when they can afford it, more sophisticated value-added services to end users. So as we pursue our research, we have our own North Stars or guidelines that we have summarized across 3 perspectives. So we have the end user perspective. So we're talking about guidelines that are familiar to most of you, as we've been using them in the past years to guide our research. So it's simplicity, transparency, etc. And then we have other guidelines from the public sector perspective. So ease of administration, cost efficiency. As we mentioned, those who administer the program can also be considered as internal users, and their experience also matters. Then from the private sector perspective, we are going to figure out whether private sector entities can support RUC technology and operations, is it interesting for them to do so? And for them to be interested in RUC, RUC has to present a compelling business case. So now that I presented those objectives, I'm going to move to the research approach that we use. So in a nutshell, we conducted research in 3 steps that ran concurrently. We broke down RUC into core functions. We identified, and are still identifying, by the way, different mileage reporting methods and payment choices that we should be offering, and identifying new business models that can support RUC. In the next slides, I am going to summarize the methodology and some findings from each of these research steps before taking you to the short list of pilot scenarios that we got to by using this approach. And by the way, Travis, I am not seeing any hands raised, so I will just continue and count on you to interrupt me when there are questions.
Please go ahead. But while you're offering to be interrupted, Commissioner Jennings has joined us. Thank you for being here, Commissioner Jennings, if you'd like to say hello.
Hello, everyone. Sorry I was late. Doctor's appointment. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay. Okay, I'm going to zoom on step 1 and explain what we did and how we define that RUC framework. So this is something that's familiar to you. I mean, I know we've been presenting it several times. So the reason we came up with that RUC framework was also to unbundle different RUC components to help us distinguish where the pain points were and what were the key system components that we should be improving. So we identified, or I guess 2 priority areas sort of emerged: mileage reporting methods and payment methods. And the reason these were the most prominent was because, I mean, we know that people are transitioning from an almost invisible gas tax and now have to do 2 main things. They have to report their mileage and then remember to pay for their mileage. Consumption and payment are a little more asynchronous than with the gas tax. So, let me just back up. Okay. So we are focusing on filing mileage reporting methods that could cover different use cases or circumstances people find themselves in, and trying to figure out, and so these could be people in low or high connectivity situations, people who have different accesses to technology and have different reporting preferences. Then when it comes to mileage payment, to different payment methods, we have to find what's suited to different customer needs and maybe try to find ways of helping people get closer to the smaller, more frequent payments they had with the gas tax. So what we did is that we inventoried technologies to cover those diverse customer situations or circumstances and preferences using that framework that we presented to you before. And I'll just summarize what we found in the next slides. I know we went through that, but I think everyone would benefit from a reminder of what we did in the past pilot and where we're taking this further. Moving to the payment section, we've seen that there have been pretty advanced and successful partnerships to support more equitable payment plans across tolling, transit, and mobility as a service. And the thought is to try to leverage some of those best practices for RUC and avoid reinventing the wheel. So moving on to the next slide. So I just want to focus on, or let you know what we have not been focusing on in this research in task 3, the innovation task, but we have been researching in the cost of collection activities. And by the way, as we move through this update, there are two areas, invoicing and enforcement, that I will not be focusing on. My main focus will be mileage reporting and payment. For now, I'll just say that there will be a different spotlight that is dedicated to that. Travis went through that earlier. We'll have the cost of collection spotlight that will be going over the findings, especially as it relates to improving invoicing and enforcement. For now, the only thing I'll say about invoicing is that we have enforcement is that we have tested invoicing in the past. We've seen that the invoicing mechanisms that have been used by different RUC players have been pretty reliable. It's a matter of applying rates to mileage collected and fuel consumption. So we've concluded that this is something that is well oiled. Most of the issues relating to the invoice had mostly to do with coming up with a user-friendly way to present the invoice so that it promotes understanding of the policy and is transparent about how RUC is computed without overwhelming the end user. So making the invoice layout simple is more the focus of our research. For enforcement, the question will be what mechanisms are relevant and acceptable in Washington. Our current focus is to design mileage reporting methods and payments to increase compliance. And once we understand how effective systems are to help people be naturally compliant, then we'll be in a better position to decide whether a lighter touch or heavier touch to enforcement would be needed. So all that to say, our focus today would be mileage reporting methods and payment. So now I'll switch gear and we'll be looking at business models using the same framework as the starting point. So the questions we've asked are the following. First, we wondered about feasibility. So what are the new business models out there and do they have the capability to cover functions? And then can they do it in a way that supports system and operational equity, meaning can they provide options that are simple, accessible, convenient for mileage reporting and payment so that people can be naturally compliant? And then can they improve user experience, not only by solving pain points, but maybe also by providing value-added services? And finally, can they address typical RUC issues, not only the privacy protection, but for example, helping finding more efficient ways to capture out-of-state mileage? Now, what we have seen up till now in terms of RUC capabilities, just based on our experience from past pilots and programs, is that we have technology providers like VCon and DriveSync. They are two vendors that participated in the first pilot. They have the ability to cover the first 3 functions here: identifying the vehicle, successfully collecting mileage data and reporting it. And then we found that tolling account managers such as Immovis and A2B, also vendors that participate in the first pilot, have successfully supported all the account management functions from invoice generation to payment collection. And they can also enforce payments through their participant agreements and can collect revenue and remit revenue to the state reliably. We've seen them do that in the past pilot and also in active programs today. And then we've seen some telematics providers like Azuga that have shown that they can support the full RUC process through their integrated RUC platform. Then here on the left, we added vehicle registry systems, such as those operated by DOL. And it looks like, except for that mileage collection component, all RUC functions could be covered, albeit in a simplified way. So in short, we have 5 entities with compatible business models, and the question after that we asked was how can we find, or who else can support RUP functions effectively? So we came up with a list of other potential business models. So we have a list of candidates here. We've had conversations with some of these players across these industries. And the question is what components of RUP can they support, and can they do that efficiently? So this leads us to the next section, which is comparison of business models. But before jumping there, I'll just pause to see whether there are questions before moving on. I know this is a recap, but I want to make sure everyone is on the same page.
Go ahead, Senator.
I actually had a bill for this, and it basically said you pay for your mileage charge when you register your car. DOL would set up an account, which they need to do anyway, an individual account. So DOL sets up an account. A person could, for example, decide to just automatically pay $25 a month. They'll just estimate how much their mileage is going to be. And they could, at their option, just mail in a $25 a month payment. When they go to register their car, they walk in, they hand their registration, and they say, what was your mileage last year? Which we know. What is your mileage this year? Tell us what it is. Pay the difference. We look, and then subagent would check the DOL account, see how much money is in there, and say, you owe $250, you got $300 in your account, you're good. When that person goes to sell the car dealer does the exact same thing. Car dealer goes through, not only checks the bank, but then also checks the DOL account for mileage to see how many miles that they used in the last thing, deducts that when they go to sell a car. When people go out of state, they would then sign an affidavit saying that they went so many miles out of state. I went out of state this many miles. I talked to some GPS vendors because what we're concerned about is having third-party people accumulate the data, and then so a third party would know where I'm driving my car, which I don't really like. However, if I had an internal GPS that would generate a report that would, and the main concern is Eastern Washington. If I'm a farmer, I'm putting 2/3 of my mileage is on my farm. I'm not even on the road. GPS manufacturers could generate a report that the person could then print out and keep. And we just tell people, keep your report for a period of 3 years or something if you, quote, get audited, and just pay your mileage that year. So they walk in, they say, I drove 10,000 miles, but 5,000 miles of that were off-road. I'm paying for 5,000 miles. And just do it that way. The cost of collection is minimal. I mean, you have to pay the sub-agent some money to handle it. But you're not paying a third-party vendor in order to do this. And you don't have the privacy concerns of having somebody else have my data on where I'm driving, which I don't particularly like. So that was my suggestion. And I actually had a bill, maybe not as elaborate as that, taking that in, but have DOL set up the account and people make monthly payments. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well,
So,
this makes a lot of sense, and I'm afraid you just stole my thunder. I mean, this is definitely something we considered, and at some point we'll be introducing what we call the minimum viable service that could be run efficiently, and it's really based on what a vehicle registry system could do. So I'm kind of nodding to all of what you said, Senator.
In short, the spoiler alert is that we probably will have a pilot, one of the pilot concepts resembling something you just described as an option that we'd like to explore next year. Representative Orcutt, hand up.
Thanks. I recognize this is a small amount of the market, but it would be no small amount of money or complexity to doing this. I noticed on one of your last slides, you showed everybody that you've kind of talked to, but I didn't see rental car companies on there. And I'm wondering, how you would propose to deal with the rental car, because it's leased for a day or a week rather than, several months at a time. How would that work with the rental car companies for somebody who rents a car for a day or a weekend and puts, 200, 300, 500 or 1,000 miles on the car?
We haven't specifically yet talked to rental companies, but as we've been, looking at different use cases, we have discussed what would happen, how would they want to collect RUC, what detail would they have to have in the invoice, and whether they decide to pass on the cost or not. So these are definitely in some of our considerations. We know that the system, when we design a system, it has to address their needs, for example, but we haven't talk with them to see how they could support any of the functions, because they would be mostly end users to the system than main players for the time being. This is how we see them. I mean, main players supporting the VUC functions.
Senator Fortunato.
Yeah, very briefly, I'm sorry for missing so many of these, but what are people saying about the 18th Amendment? Where's the money go? Money go into the gas tax account?
Well, we're within the confines of at the research level, we're not taking on that question. We, if you recall, I think 2020 in the final report that the commission sent to the legislature, the commission had a recommendation to dedicate RUC revenue to highways. But also presented an appendix to that final report that showed through our research the options for how to do that and some of the alternatives. But as a steering committee, we didn't take up the question as something to be recommended. We left it as a choice for the legislature, of course, ultimately, and the commission weighed in with the recommendation.
Thank you.
Rima, do you want to add anything to that, or is that?
No, I mean, I think you've captured it. The research isn't really looking at those policy decisions, but that would definitely be conversations in the context of legislation for sure.
Okay, I'll carry on if no more questions, and then I can always stop to take more. So comparison of business models. So this section presents where we landed and how we are figuring out whether having standalone business models and comparing them could make sense. But first, let me I think we went through that already. I'm just going to summarize where we landed last time, where we started actually in the first Washington pilot. So that's a very quick reminder of what we did. We covered situations where people had no connectivity and preferred having in-person assistance through VLOs. So we have it here. And then we covered situations where people had vehicles that could have third-party connectivity through smartphone apps, for example. And we had tested odometer image capture through the smartphone, and another more sophisticated method, which was more automated through what we call the Mile Mapper app. And then we also tested plug-in devices for vehicles that were compatible. I'm not going to go through that. I know you're familiar with this, most of you. Just going to very quickly summarize the different areas we're looking at to make sure that we cover more situations to give more flexibility to end users. So new things that we'll be looking at for Washington would be looking at options around self-reporting. So a bit of what Senator Fortunato talked about, like a simple method. And then move to more sophisticated automated methods like the native automated telematics. It has been tested elsewhere, but not in Washington. And then a few other options. The purpose is not to go over all of this. I know you've had updates before. It's just to show you that we are trying to find things to cover different situations and address mileage reporting preferences. We mentioned that we have already piloted run pilots and programs using different business models. On the left here, you have those that have already been involved, and we identify additional candidates. So this is by no means exhaustive. These are the ones that we have talked to because we think they have capabilities. And we're trying to identify how they could be involved in a pilot. So let me just move to the next slide and show how we combined those reporting choices to cover different situations and the business models according to the conversations we had with players across the industry. So we came up with a short list of a few scenarios, starting with the vehicle registry based system that could cover self-reporting options. And then we also are considering what it would be and how collaborating with how through retail partnerships, we could have more options for reporting assistance, like providing in-person assistance to collect odometer readings or to outfit vehicles with more automated means of reporting. And then we have mobility as a platform providers that could lend their technologies to cover both self-reporting parts and then self-reporting options and automated options. Eventually data aggregators from the insurance industry that could specifically cover the needs of commercial fleets. And then collaboration with automakers that could offer highly automated options. And by the way, as we talk with automakers, one of the things that we are asking them is that, are they able to do more than just the mileage reporting methods? So all of that culminates into a potential pilot approach, which could consist in comparing business models. Just one note, we had in the past slides, we essentially showed mileage reporting methods that could be supported by each of these players, but these players, as I mentioned, for automakers could support much more than just mileage reporting. So they could be doing invoicing, payment collection too. So the idea, once we kind of diagnose all the different possibilities that they could support, is to compare business models and see how they perform across metrics that we would define across equity, user experience, and cost of collection. So it's about coming up with objective metrics, because some of these, like equity and user experience, they can be pretty subjective unless we put some frameworks around them. So it would be comparing standalone business models and trying to score these in a pilot setting. Now I'm going to move maybe to the section where we pause for feedback and see what you think about this type of pilot scenario. And Travis, I'm going to hand it to you maybe to facilitate any discussion that we may have in this section.
Thanks, Roshini. And so we thought we would pause both to give everyone a break, especially Roshini, before we go on to the next session. But also, we're specifically interested in your thoughts, if you have any, on the two questions we have on the screen. One is, you've heard now about the possibility of new types of businesses or commercial participation in different aspects of RUC, ranging from the very simple to the more complex or automated with automakers, for example. So we want to think about who would be the ideal participants, other than all of you, of course, to take part in these pilots. Should folks take part in more than one in order to compare the experiences? And then secondly, when we come back to you in December with our final recommendations of aspects of RUC to test in pilots next year, we never like to pilot test just for the sake of pilot testing. We want to have a purpose. We want to measure useful outputs of these pilot tests to inform policymaking and to inform the development of institutional knowledge, especially at DOL. So we're specifically tracking user experience, equity, and cost of collection. But are there other things that we can be measuring through these pilot tests that would be important for you? And of course, these all track back to the guiding principles that the steering committee established almost a decade ago that we're still referencing back to and updating periodically. So I filibustered enough while you guys could think of any questions or comments you'd like to add at this time about what you've heard so far. And as a preview, we're going to go a little bit more detail on how we see some of these pilots coming together in the next section. Representative Orcutt.
So if you're looking at who would participate and try out this, I think you got to get some farmers, some loggers, maybe some people that do a lot of recreation off on national forest roads or DNR roads, so that they can kind of get a feel of how to deal with the on public roads, off public roads. And I do think you need to have a rental car company involved, just to see, how they would have to go about doing this and what kind of methods that they might insist upon, and what kind of policies we might need to make around that. I mean, if they come back and say, we've got to do GPS, period, then are there some policies that we as legislators need to put in place? Whereas, in your rental agreement, you need to disclose that you have a GPS tracking system on that car and it's constantly in use for the purpose of tracking miles.
Very good. Thank you for that. I offer, because earlier when you mentioned rental cars, I thought of our work in Hawaii, where rental cars make up something like 15% of the state vehicle fleet. So it's a not unimportant segment to be worried about. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned, not only for them, but that could be applied to other fleets as well. So it's a very useful idea. Senator Fortunato.
With the rental cars, the privacy issue, I don't know whether the privacy issue is as much of a concern, only because a name would not be attached. In other words, it would be Joe's Rental Car Associate, Joe's Rental Car, fleet number 501 would actually be paying the mileage tax. So it's not necessarily associated with a person. However, I guess if there was some kind of lawsuit, somebody could get that data and say this particular day or whatever. But I don't think it's so much a concern on a rental car as it is on a private vehicle. Anyway, that's my statement.
Thank you.
Okay, shall I just move on to that new section?
Please go ahead, Roshini, and we'll have another opportunity for comments and questions when we get towards the end. And I think maybe when we paint a picture of how we pull these business models together, we might have more questions.
Okay.
But carry on, please.
Thank you. Okay, so we just saw how we could compare different business models. Now we want to change perspectives and see how we can integrate business models and then compare different service levels. So the thought was really to look at things differently and try to figure out whether by integrating business models, we can have the best in-class services for the end user. Because the question is, what is simpler for the end user and how to make the decision-making process a little bit simpler. And our thinking was confronting the end user with many choices and so many entry points may not be the best experience. And we discussed when we were putting this together that it's a little bit like watching TV and having 5 remote controls to access either Xfinity, Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon, HBO Max. We don't know where to go. We just want to watch a TV program. And then often we just find ourselves in a state of confusion. And in my case, for example, I just end up reading a book because it's much more simple. So going back to RUC, where do we start? Where should we go? Where should end users go? We know that how these frameworks work because we deconstructed RUC and we know which tiny little boxes we're ticking, but we can't expect the end user to know that. So we have to give them some orientation and a natural starting point. So the thinking here is, how about we give them a single entry point that gives them access to a set of integrated services? And we're thinking there are 2 natural starting points, one of which we already tested in the past pilot, but one of them exists in most states. And to Senator Fortunato's point, we have vehicle registry-based systems. And vehicle owners already interface with these. Account-based systems are the ones that we already tested in the first pilot as another entry point. And in Oregon and Utah, for example, that's what they're using. And in the following slides, what we're going to do is mainly focus on the vehicle registry scenario as the entry point. Mainly because we haven't tested it in the past pilot and because this could well be a viable way of looking at things and integrating services and enhancing service levels as we go. So just starting here, the approach would be to start with existing building blocks, then defining a minimum viable RUC service, and then progressively identify where enhancements are needed through partnerships. So the enhancements would allow us to address pain points in priority and then offer value-added services if there's an opportunity. So here, the focus would be identifying, if we start with the first one, which is identifying existing building blocks, is try to identify which functions are already covered by a vehicle registry system. Figuring out what's missing, and then designing the most efficient, cost-efficient, simple service for the end user, and then progressively see how to enhance it from going from the most needed option that address pain points, as I mentioned, to the ones that add value-added services. So we start by doing a diagnosis in a certain way of a typical vehicle registry system to see what exists and what's missing for a basic RUC service. So typically, a vehicle registry system has the source data that is required, that is vehicle and owner data. They would need mileage data. Most vehicle registry systems do not have that. And then most of the time, we know that these systems are equipped to send annual reminders to vehicle owners, have the ability to accept one-off payments at least, ability to issue simple receipts, and then there's a baked-in enforcement process at vehicle registration renewal, and they already have fund transfer mechanisms in place. So in conclusion, if we add a simple form of mileage reporting, which is self-reporting, we could have the simplest form of RUC. The next question is which enhancements to offer. We could add more reporting options, but the most obvious pain points to address seem to be limited payment options. And one of our conclusions is that if we add more flexible payment mechanisms, could that help address that biggest pain point, which is having that bulk payment instead of incremental payments that the gas tax usually offers. So I move a little bit too quick, but this brings us to those possible pilot scenarios that are based on integrated business models. What I can pause again, but what I want to do is introduce some other concepts and then hand off to Jingjing for more discussions around what pilot tests could look like as we compare different service levels. I'm going to move here and just pause again to make sure I capture every guest question. And if there are none, I'll just move on. Okay.
I think you can go ahead, Roshini.
Yeah, I'll just move on then. Okay, I'm just going to unpack that minimum viable RUC service based on a vehicle registry system. So if we have a vehicle registry as a starting point, we can imagine the leanest, simplest service based on core vehicle registry function. So we can imagine a system where RUC reporting and payment is tied to the vehicle registration renewal cycle. So in this system, we could have an end user self-report mileage annually, and then use the baked-in payment mechanism, which would be ideally prepay, because when you prepay, there's less need to have strong enforcement mechanisms, and then use the ongoing vehicle renewal process to enforce payment. So that would be the natural process. So that would be, and I think as Senator Fortunato kind of described it, maybe the leanest way to look at it. And we could, in a pilot setting, maybe one idea would be to simulate how this could work. And I'm going to hand it off to Jingjing to see how we can throw around a few ideas to see how we could simulate a vehicle registry-based system and collect feedback and assess such a scenario across the user acceptance, equitability, and cost of reduction metrics.
Great, thanks, Roshini. So this is the first of the 3 pilot ideas that are coming out of this work stream. There may be others that come out of the other work streams that we'll bring up later. So Rashini explained the purpose of the RUC Innovation Task. The purpose of the next phase, which is to conduct the mini pilots, is to try to build a model of the system and use that model to get real feedback from real users. The simple act of building the model often uncovers all sorts of learning about the details that need to be thought through, and also forces the design team to address them at the technical level or also raise them to a policy level. So for our team, this is the eternal debate. Do we get more out of the act of building and operating the system, or do we get more out of the feedback from users that are getting the hands-on experience with the pilot? My answer is that it's both. So that takes us back to the first WARUC pilot. We found that even with the most thoughtful design, the biggest user experience pain point was around enrollment and account activation. So the enrollment was designed as carefully and as seamlessly as possible before launch, using the latest in design practices, technology, and pilot operations support. There was a decision support on the WARUC website. There was single sign-on and a centralized customer contact database. And the help desk was available for anyone who wanted to contact them and get pilot support. But even with just lots and lots of reminders over many, many months, there were many people who never got past the point of enrollment. Whether this was because the user had to enter in that really long 14-digit VIN, or the reluctance around creating yet another account in this world where there's too many accounts already, or not having the time to stop and snap that odometer photo with your smartphone, or unpacking the device and figuring out how to plug it into your vehicle. Those that did not get past enrollment found that the experience, the ones that did get past enrollment found the experience to be great. But the bottom line was the simple act of having to enroll left people behind, or if RUC was mandatory, would leave them non-compliant. So the bright idea for this first pilot concept is partially based on what Senator Fortunato described, and also recent findings from the Hawaii Road Usage Charge demonstration. So Hawaii conducted 2 RUC pilots, one that used the odometer reading collected annually for all drivers to reach out to them about RUC. It was sent out to 350,000 households, and over 11% of the households responded. So we got a really good response rate that was very representative of the public. And when presented with using something that they were already familiar with, and in their case, it was the annual safety check alongside the technology options, 87% of the public preferred just using the mileage reporting for their mileage for RUC as part of their annual safety check. The second pilot in Hawaii conducted was very similar to the first WARUC pilot, where 2,000 participants were offered the opportunity to test out plug-in device and the odometer photo method. And even with those folks, 40% of the volunteers that took the time to participate in the technology pilot in Hawaii indicated that they would ultimately prefer to use the vehicle inspection method. So we want to bring some of those results to Washington. And in Washington, the process that people are the most familiar with already and have to go through on an annual basis every year is the vehicle registration. So a close integration or association with the vehicle registry process could resolve a lot of the vehicle enrollment hurdles that was experienced by pilot participants in the first WARUC pilot. So combining RUC with existing touch points in the vehicle registry process could greatly decrease the inconvenience factor for people. These touch points might include when the annual registration notice is sent out, or when the vehicle owner goes online or in person to pay for the annual registration. If RUC could be more closely associated with the vehicle registry process, maybe the VIN wouldn't even need to be entered, or another account wouldn't have to be set up. And best of all, maybe the user can just self-declare their vehicle odometer and type or write their vehicle odometer reading in at the time of the vehicle renewal, so no technology is needed. This could be supplemented with spot audits or audits as necessary where it was indicated that it was needed. So these are all fresh new concepts that could be tested, that could be very possibly useful for taking care of a majority of the people in the population out there for a relatively low cost. One lesson we learned supporting Hawaii is that such a pilot doesn't require actual integration with existing systems. It can be a heavy lift for state systems to be modified just for the purposes of a pilot. So this pilot can be done through some data exports to simulate integration with the vehicle registration process. It could be done as a tabletop exercise or online. The key is to get it close enough so that the user can relate to the experience and provide good feedback about it. All right, I'm going to pass it back to Roshini now that I've rambled on for long enough, and then she'll introduce the next concept.
Yeah, thank you, Jingjing. Making sure there are no questions. Oh, we have a question from. Oh, go ahead, please. I think it's Janet, right?
Yeah, thank you. So as I was listening to this and I was thinking about the potential for integrating with the vehicle registration system, which does sound like it could be the simplest and maybe most efficient way of working with a RUC, I kept thinking back about the current issues of acceptability with our registration system is the need to pay for the whole amount of the registration at one time. And we think about in this state, how many times we have voted as voters on $30 license tab fees. People don't like that surprise of the big license registration fee once a year. So I would hope that in a pilot, there could be some testing about what would make this acceptable through the registration system, looking at, instead of annual payments, how can we do it in portionality, the entire registration fee, not just the gas tax?
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good point and the perfect segue to the enhanced service level that we could offer. I think one of the main principles of a minimum viable RUC service is to see what can be done the most efficient way and what percentage of the people would go through that channel. Say you have 80% of the people being okay with a minimum viable RUC service, closely aligned to that vehicle registration cycle and are okay with the bulk payment, then what do we do with that 20% other, and how do we maybe address those more flexible payment plans, as you mentioned? And that takes us to maybe that second scenario, which is, how about we give the same starting point, have one simplified way to report mileage, which would be annually through self-reporting, and how about handing off to partners to administer payment plans when there's a requirement to be more flexible. And one of the ideas here is to say, if some people don't go through that default track, which is the vehicle, what is already supported by typical vehicle registry systems, how about we hand off to private partners that can administer a payment plan? And when we say administer payment plan, it's like they would offer post-pay, prepay, different payment frequencies, different payment means that they could accept, and they're already equipped to do that because they do it already. Tolling operators do it already, mass providers do it, transit operators do it. So how about, without confusing the consumer and integrating services, we can hand them off gently to a partner to administer those payment plans. And those partners, because they have contracts, can also gently enforce the payments, and by providing incentives, reminders, nudging people to its compliance. And if not, they have their own payment collection processes that are efficient. So that brings us to the idea of an enhanced, above that MVP, minimum viable RUC service, going one level up by offering more payment options. So that could be a second pilot scenario. And with that, I hope I answered your question. And I'm going to toss it over to Jingjing to animate this discussion too.
Yeah, great. And I think you guys are pretty much doing our presentation for us. This is great. So this next biggest pain point about moving from a gas tax to a RUC is around the payment frequency, as you mentioned, Jan. So the gas tax paid on a roughly weekly basis, RUC is much less frequently. So there are folks that don't mind paying on an annual basis, and we want to make sure we take advantage of that and don't channel everybody into more frequent payments, because the more frequent payments you have, the more costly it becomes. However, there are many people, and in other states we've looked at, it's maybe about half of the respondents when polled said they are interested in paying less or more frequently than annually. So we need to make sure that that is an option that is offered. So if we take a look at it, paying annually is very compatible with the vehicle registry process. That's something that's paid on an annual basis. So let's take advantage of that possibly. So build this idea in this pilot around the vehicle registry, see how many people stick with that method. However, for the rest of the folks out there, and this would include low income and possibly businesses too, they may prefer to pay quarterly or monthly, and possibly they might even prefer to pay in cash. So what we've heard from many DMVs around the country is that supporting more frequent payments is not something that is a light lift for them. It can be really difficult and costly because that's not how their business model has been developed. So what we would like to try to do in this pilot is, given that this is a major pain point and a financial equity concern, we propose partnering with a service that can support more frequent payments. We presented some of those ideas in an earlier innovation spotlight, and we did hear back that with interest about digging deeper. So that's what we did. We took a look at the vendors out there that could possibly provide this service. What we found is that some of the more retail-based services that offer more frequent payments can be very costly, particularly if someone were to fall behind on their payments. And this is because there is some risk associated with taking on such a service, so that the retail business models price it so that they are for sure covered in the situation where someone ends up not paying. This is kind of a constantly changing world, so we'll keep monitoring that. But what we did find is that the private sector that supports other government operations have pricing structures that are more aligned with what people might expect of a government service. So examples of these are tolling contractors and MOS providers. So toll and transit operations require more frequent billing of smaller amounts, and thus they actually support more frequent payments. So potentially very good partners there. As Roshini explained, although tolling is not a perfect match for supporting the full RUC service, there are some pieces of it that may fit really well. So again, piloting the payment options enhanced service also, it doesn't require necessarily real integration with a live system. There are many things we can do to simulate the payment plan experience. So what we can do is, using the base pilot concept of the vehicle registry, at some point branch off and offer the customer the option for more frequent payments, and then hand the customer off to a private partner to set up the payment methods. This could also include setting up auto bill against a credit card, or it could be assisting the customer with breaking down their payments into smaller amounts and possibly providing a method for paying by cash. So installment fees associated with more frequent payments then could require a small additional fee, and that could be split between the user, the agency, or taken on by either one of those. So I see a question from Senator Fortunato.
So, you know, as I said earlier, and I guess Sadiq from DOL, if DOL was to set up an account for Phil Fortunato, is it possible for Phil Fortunato simply to do a bill pay or a check and mail that check to the DOL, to Fortunato's account every month? So every month I just pay 20, you know, I estimate I'm driving so many miles a month. My cost per mile is $2, whatever it is. Let's just say, you know, I estimate 25 bucks a month, and I just mail 25 bucks a month. Or I could walk into a vehicle subagent, and as you suggested, maybe pay cash, and I could just walk into a vehicle subagent and say, here's 25 bucks or 50 bucks or whatever for my mileage account. And a vehicle subagent would then process that. My concern with this is the cost of collection. By involving that third party and doing credit card stuff, unless DOL can do credit cards, and I guess that's a question for Sadiq. So unless DOL can do automatic credit card debits, similar to what Good to Go does, you know, the cost of collecting the money is disproportionate. We're wasting taxpayers' money by paying a third-party vendor to collect taxes, which doesn't really seem the right way to go. So that's if DOL can handle somehow receiving money, whether that be from the subagent or me mailing a check directly to my particular account, that sort of solves that frequency. The other thing, the other concern that we have is for lower income people, as you mentioned. And one solution to that is some lower income people that live within the Sound Transit area, for example, have much higher vehicle registration renewals. So if we were able to say, we are going to allow you to renew your vehicle instead of every year, we're going to allow you to renew it every quarter. So that way, you're not incurring much more than a vehicle subagent, couple of dollar handling charge, and they're breaking up this big payment, but they're also making their mileage tax payments. So, and then my one other concern, I'll wait until the very end, and then I'll tell you my other concern. But that's my solution to this problem.
Thanks so much, Senator Fortunato. I absolutely, you're completely right that the bottom line is the cost of collection. And so that is one thing we have talked to DOL about, and I don't believe they can actually currently support the more frequent payments. It's something that they've been looking at. However, given that, then you take a look at the cost of trying to change what the current setup is to be able to collect more frequent payments against a private vendor that can come in and do that. The cost probably right now would be less expensive for a private vendor to come in and handle the more frequent payments. I think in the long run, that is definitely something that could be looked at. Similar to the low income, I think one of the things we have been looking at in Hawaii is combining vehicle registration with RUC and looking at as a whole complete picture, right? Because those are all things you're paying for transportation. Well, let's combine them and look at them together. So it is something that could be looked at together with road usage charge.
So when should I make my comments about the gas tax applying to the RUC, to the mileage tax?
Wanted to give
I do
Sadiq a
that now or
chance.
at the end?
Let's hold that because I wanted to give Sadiq a chance without putting you on the spot at all, Sadiq. Hopefully Jing covered it, but if you did want to add anything further, please feel free.
Thanks, Travis. That's an interesting idea, Senator. I think that the reality is anytime you involve a subagent, there will be a cost associated. So when you multiply that by 12, possibly more transactions a year, it becomes, significant. We do have online renewals, and right now online renewals are pushed through subagents for finalization. But if it was something that did not require finalization at a subagent, conceivably we could accept a credit card or a ACH bank transfer payment online on a regular basis without the overhead of a subagent fee. That said, there would be credit card fees in the case of a credit card. I think the ACH is free right now, so we could conceivably serve the public that way. That would be an option. Now, that said, I don't know that DOL is set up right now for monthly payments of this nature. Not to say we couldn't be, but I don't know that we have all that infrastructure in place right now.
All right, so what you're saying is DOL is not set up to automatically do $25 a month to somebody, but somebody can simply log in and every month and pay you $25 with not that much of an enhancement to your payment system.
Conceivably.
Thank you.
Let's hear the gas tax idea.
Well, my problem is currently, and again, I apologize because I missed some of the things. So the problem I have is I drive an F-150. My estimated mileage per gallon is 10 miles to the gallon, 20 miles to the gallon, whatever it is. Therefore, my estimated number of gallons that I would have used to drive 2,000 miles for the month is, I don't know how many, whatever it is. And then I take that money and I deduct it from the mileage tax, and then I pay the difference. That's the way we are currently going to set this up, correct? For people that are not electric car users.
That was the way it was tested, exactly as you described, yes.
So, but that's an estimate.
Correct. For a manual self-reporting of miles where there's no information about fuel actually consumed, we used the EPA rating, which is an estimate, and it's individual cases may vary. It's the only consistent source we have for MPG ratings across the whole fleet. But you're right, it won't be a precise measure of actual fuel consumed corresponding with those miles.
So my other question comes in is, do some of these other GPS-based systems actually calculate the miles? Calculate the gas mileage?
Yeah. In fact, in the first Walrock pilot, the plug-in device measures fuel consumed, the number of gallons. So we were able to use that to measure the amount that was deducted more precisely. And for folks who didn't choose that device, we used the EPA ratings to estimate it.
Okay, so what we need to do is compare that. So you have data on that? You have the data of the GPS calculating exactly how much mileage. And we need to compare that to the estimated mileage that you would use under EPA, because one of my concerns is that we're so concerned with, for example, if somebody says, I drove 1,000 miles out of state, so, we're so concerned with that guy falsifying the thing that therefore we're going to put this complicated system in place. So we're going to spend 5 times more money than the few people that slip through the cracks or falsify something. So the question comes in is, I would like to see that actual gas mileage consumption versus what we would estimate, and then see what that difference is. And is it more? Is it less? Is it consistently more? Is it consistently less? Can we refine that a little better? And anyway, that's just to see what that. So if you could get that data, that'd be great. Thank you.
We can. Thank you.
Oh, we have a question from Rep. Orcutt.
Thanks, and it's more of a comment, just a reminder that we're going to run into a problem when we do credits with those in border communities, as we have a lot of people that are commuting from Clark County, even Cowlitz County, down into Portland, Oregon. So they could actually be fueling up in Portland, and then they come back. So they've never paid sales or gas tax to the state, but then they come back to Washington and claim under the RUC a credit against it.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is definitely a well-known issue and debate. I know there's about 13 minutes left. I will walk through the last slides, but before doing that, I just want to point out what Sadiq just said about every time you involve a sub-agent, there's a cost involved. Of course, the cost driver here is the human labor. And every time we're talking about handoffs to the private sector, we have that efficiency focus. Like, is the private sector better positioned to do it more efficiently than a state agency would? And if then we would hand off. So that is mostly the logic, instead of, saying that DOL could support everything. So as we move further to the other service levels, we'll be still talking about those handoffs when it makes sense and when there's a relative advantage for the private sector to do so. I'm going to move to the last concept, which is enhancing the RUC service even more to offer more mileage reporting methods. And that means more partnerships with the private sector. And when we talk about enhancing or increasing the different mileage reporting methods, that's where more partnerships make sense because we're talking about technology. And this is where states usually are not equipped to run those technologies. So here we're talking about more integration of business models in order not to confuse the end user, and so that they don't have the impression they're being handed off left and right. In that same concept would have the handoff to administer payment plans. But the thing here is to say, why don't we have a single partner that can do all of that to provide an integrated experience? And this partner, say it's a mass provider, integrates with different technology providers to provide more mileage reporting methods and to provide more payments. So we can see this as a private partner augmenting the capabilities of a vehicle registry-based system when it makes sense, to offer more options when it is relevant. So now I'm going to move to the last slide to say, so we can discuss how we could pilot something to understand where it makes sense to hand off and what is the added value of proposing more choice. Jingjing, on to you.
Okay, so this third pilot concept goes one step further than concept 1 and 2. The driver behind this concept is that there are some people in businesses that may prefer to have, as was just mentioned, have actual miles billed and more frequently. So this could include people that do a lot of interstate travel, and so want to ensure that they are only being billed for the miles driven in Washington, and a lot of other cases as well. This is a hybrid model where the entry point is the vehicle registry-based system still, and that's the default as the simple and possibly majority of the folks preferring sorry, that option, while also providing an option for those that may prefer alternative mileage reporting methods, such as the plug-in device, odometer photo, or even their own fleet management software, like we were talking about with rental cars. So the type of partner for this type of enhanced service includes the commercial account managers that have participated in the WARUC pilot initially. And as Roshini mentioned, we're also finding some other players out there that can support a larger range of services beyond just RUC. So what we're going to do with these pilots is not necessarily to develop the business models themselves. The market will determine the most successful business models, and the innovation and risk probably really should sit with the private sector. But what we need to figure out in this pilot is to determine the basic requirements across the board, the must-haves versus the nice-to-have features. We'd like to test the simplest concept of the vehicle registry method, and then find out where and how to make that interface to the private sector that might sit best to offer users the best and most seamless experience while keeping costs down and low. All right, next slide. This last slide summarizes the 3 main concepts that we presented today. The pilot concepts are shown along the top. Concept 1 is what we might be able to provide as the most basic and lean, simple way of implementing the RUC. Concept 2 includes the integration of what we found to be the most needed single enhancement. Now, of course, additional enhancement could be integrated one by one, but concept 3, the idea behind that one really is about integrating multiple enhancements through one single vendor to manage the entire user experience once the user has left the vehicle registry process. So that can possibly provide a much more seamless experience rather than having the vehicle registry process shooting people off in all these different directions depending on their various needs. So along the left, those are the items that we hope to measure. And so we will fill this, the consumer report circles there, in based on the feedback from pilot participants. So that's the end of my presentation. Any questions on that last third concept?
Jingjing, one comment on the last concept. The last concept, though we're talking about a single vendor integrating everything, we're still talking about opening the market and promoting partnerships. So the single vendor would be the single interface, but they would be integrating with a variety of technology providers. So they would be opening the door to more private sector partners. And there are techniques to unbundle contracts so that it's not a single contract, right? It's kind of making sure that we're not letting one big player enter and close the doors to the smaller ones.
Yeah, for the pilot, it's just figuring out where that interface is through this pilot. However, making that that interface may be available to other vendors or in a way that vendors could be interchangeable is the key to kind of what we've been talking about for years now with the open market and flexibility there.
Are we done?
Just about. I think we have some next steps, right, Roshini? We only have 5 minutes. And
Yes, well, this was a recap. It was a recap of different types of pilot tests, but I think we went through that. I would just move to the last slide with the next steps for the pilot research. Yeah. I think what we are expecting here is to, refine some of these ideas a little bit further, have more conversations with some of our vendors. We know that some of them can support these scenarios that we've been talking about. So it's about plucking the most important things that we have to research. Just researching everything doesn't make sense. So it's like, it's about deciding in these spotlights and committees what the priorities are. And I know we have 2 more sessions to share more findings with you to help us reach that.
If I can butt in before our time runs out. When you're talking about, are you talking to GPS manufacturers to see whether they can develop or have a GPS specifically that would give me a report, but would not, it's not a plug-in device, say, to report for a third-party vendor, but I would be able to generate my own report saying how many miles I drove on state roads. And that's specifically mostly for Eastern Washington, where they're driving many miles on their own farm. So GPS manufacturers, are you talking to them or just people that can provide this service?
We have been talking to technology providers. When we talk with account managers, they integrate with technology providers that provide that GPS technology. So we expand our conversations, I see, to the GPS aspects and what capabilities we have to detect on-road and off-road travel. So the short answer is yes, we are looking at these, and we are also, during our conversations, we're discovering that there are some vendors are trying to develop capabilities of aggregating, and that's kind of they don't have a product to show us yet, but figuring out how they can compute the GPS, aggregate it on a device before sending it to a commercial account manager, so that they don't have to share detailed trip data. But this technology is not, I guess, mature yet. Oh, go ahead, Travis.
I was just going to close out and thank you for that answer. And I actually was going to add briefly to it. We are working with a lot of different technology and software companies. This task is one of the more nebulous and challenging ones out of all of our research, because the mission we were given was go figure out how to do RUC better. That's basically the mission of this task. And we did not limit in any way the exploration of possible improvements. We looked at what's already been done through the Washington pilot and other pilots. We looked at going backward in technology terms to manual reporting. And we're also, as Roshini presented, looking to other sectors from automotive and insurance and retail partnerships to figure out where are there learnings and elements of this system that we can plug in to make RUC easier, cheaper, and more equitable. So it's a huge task. And thank you, Roshini, for distilling it into those 3 neat, tidy concepts that hopefully we can present again in December alongside the other ones from the other 2 task areas that we'll talk about at the next 2 spotlight sessions. So if you could flip to the last slide, it's just a reminder that we have coming up 2 weeks from yesterday, again, November 3rd, cost of collection, where we'll drill down on the 3 topics that we workshopped with the Department of Licensing and Oregon and Utah DOTs. By the way, those 3 topics were customer service, enforcement, and procurement of outside support. So the idea being, we're not looking to pick one winner, but rather figure out ways to work with technology providers to make sure that RUC can evolve as technology improves and not get stuck in time. On November 23rd, we'll present the equity results. And then again, on December 13th, we'll be all together for a full steering committee meeting where the output will be a list of pilot tests that we can all expect to hopefully be participating in next year. And again, those will be smaller pilots than the last one. They will be focused on specific elements of RUC with smaller participation. So with that, we have 2 minutes for any parting questions or remarks.
Thank you.
Just a quick question, Rima, is that going to be in person on December 13th? And is
Virtual.
it going to be at the airport?
No, it's
gonna be
virtual. Yeah.
Have you looked at Lewis County to see if we could actually do it in person?
No.
Nobody wants to go to Lewis County.
Well, not that we don't want to go to Lewis County.
Go to Lewis County, what, to experience the nightlife?
Lewis County, the COVID rates are coming down much faster than they are in some of the other areas of the state.
I think virtual is probably where we're going to go for now, but in the future, we'll have to see if we can convince the senator to go to Lewis County.
Well, hopefully we can be in person somewhere at the steering committee meeting in 2022. But we'll, Rima and the commissioners will advise on that as we get closer to that next meeting date.
That's definitely.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us. And I think we had a good discussion. And Travis, I think you have all the input you need to keep rolling and more to come in December.
Good. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on November 3rd.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Fun as always, Travis.